August the 9th, 2019, Dunedin, New South Wales, Australia. 43-year-old Damien Nott is rushed to hospital. Doctors are aghast by what they see.
My arm started getting red, and then it started blistering, these really strange green blisters. And then they found that I had bone issues, a thing called hypophosphatemic osteomalacia, which is like a rare bone disease. They found that my bones were that weak, they were on par with a 90-year-old woman's bones.
And there's a problem inside his head.
Damien's had these really sort of anomalous and strange MRI brain scans, and they're really making doctors in Australia scratch their heads.
But medics are even more shocked when they ask how Damien got these injuries.
The story goes something like this. Damien's with his girlfriend Mel, and they spot this strange object hovering over their backyard. They watch it for about, 40 seconds before Mel was a bit freaked out, and she goes back inside. Pretty sensible.
This intense flash of light from this object, and I don't know if it was what it was, but it kind of lit up my entire vision. I felt this warmth. It blinked out, it was gone.
It was at that precise moment that Damien believes his health began to deteriorate.
It got really bad over like 3 weeks, and during this time I'm having seizures. I fell over during one of these seizures and broke my back in 3 places. We went to multiple doctors. None of them could explain my arm either. They couldn't explain the type of burn. It was almost like a microwave radiation burn.
Sounds like from this range of symptoms that Damien has been exposed to a very high level of radiation. And when we talk about radiation exposure, we're talking about high energy particles moving through the body very rapidly. You might think about these particles as like tiny cannonballs that shoot through your body, and as they go through, they damage your DNA and your cells.
Doctors believe Damien is dying from the injuries he sustained. It's a strange story, but it's one that is echoed in a range of reported incidents in recent history.
Damien is ultimately one of the latest people in a line of so many others to claim that they've succumbed to these bizarre and horrific injuries after supposedly a close encounter with a UAP.
In 1951, a group of GIs fighting in Korea report they fired on a strange light that seemed to be surveying the battlefield. The object seemed to shoot back, hitting the men with a ray similar in description to the one that hit Nott. When they were examined by doctors, they were found to have dysentery and an extremely high white blood cell count. In 2021, a Pentagon-funded study was declassified under the Freedom of Information Act. It detailed reports of military personnel who had got too close to a UFO.
There were hundreds of patients affected, and their symptoms ranged in severity. Some of them had gruesome burns and sores, some of them developed brain damage, and some of them developed unexplained multiple sclerosis.
Some are said to have died from injuries that scientists would normally link with radiation poisoning.
There are some individuals that displayed some internal organ damage and also specific brain morphology. Now, it's not unusual because the human body is mostly comprised of water, and it is electrogalvanic to some degree. So we conduct electricity. That's how our nerves and everything work. So we're like a large biological electrical circuit. And there was some patients that displayed internal organ damage consistent with some sort of what one might consider directed energy type weapon.
If Damien Nott and others are purposely zapped by UAPs, this may be their way of saying, keep your distance.
Damien is convinced that his injuries came as a result of contact with the UFO. But an event from 2016 involving another health-shattering beam suggests a more earthly enemy is at work.
An unusual set of symptoms started to afflict US diplomats and CIA officers who were serving in Havana, Cuba. And the symptoms that they found were memory loss, hearing loss, and nausea. All could be explained by one thing: brain injuries.
For a while, everything was kind of hushed up because of the nature of the work some of these people performed.
When the bizarre symptoms began appearing elsewhere, a disturbing commonality emerged.
In 2018, U.S. personnel working in China began to suffer similar symptoms, and sometime later, personnel working in Russia as well. And these are two nations with known antagonism towards the United States.
Since then, there have been more than 100 reported cases of what we're calling Havana syndrome.
This is an urgent priority for President Biden, for me, for our entire government.
You've got people being forced into early retirement because of the severity of their illnesses. So, this is really sinister stuff, and it's real. Some are seeing it as a de facto act of war. It's some form of sonic weapon, which is kind of directing some form of radiation at American embassies. It's not a death ray, but it's certainly an invisible beam that makes you very ill indeed.
But even if the so-called UFO Damien and his girlfriend saw in 2019 was some sort of drone from a communist country, the weapon it apparently fired matches nothing seen before on Earth.
Damien Nott reported seeing a pulsing blue light coming out of a flying object, and that's not what you would expect him to report if he was hit by a radar weapon. In fact, if you were hit by a radar, there wouldn't be any visible light for you to witness. When I think of blue light, I think of NASA's ion thruster engines, but those are only used in space. So could this be an engine from space? Damien claims that there's no earthly explanation that he can think of to explain what he saw, so perhaps he's right.
We may never know what exactly Damien Nott encountered in the winter of 2019, but he blames whatever it was for the health problems that plague him to this day.
A lot of people say that all this is positive and aliens are positive, that there's no evil, everyone's good and they have our best intentions at heart. How can he say something like that?